It began with a storm rolling over Redwood Creek, a storm Jack Harrison had felt long before the clouds arrived. Thunder shook the sky, and Duke, the once fearless German shepherd, collapsed into a trembling shadow of the hero he used to be. The town whispered that Duke was broken, dangerous, a dog beyond saving. Even officers who once trusted him now stepped aside in fear. But everything changed the day a quiet boy walked toward Duke with nothing but a soft voice and an open heart. No commands, no fear, just kindness. And in that fragile moment, something inside the wounded dog awakened, something that would soon save an entire town and redeem a man who thought his last chance at life had already passed. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The rain came softly over Redwood Creek, whispering against the tin roofs and the empty street outside the police station. The morning light was thin, pale, almost uncertain, like a man who had forgotten how to rise. Jack Harrison sat alone in his office, sleeves rolled up, elbows resting on the scarred wooden desk. The faint hum of the radio mixed with the low crackle of the rain. He was 45 now, tall, broad-shouldered, his hair already graying at the temples. The Navy windbreaker clung to him like an old memory, worn, creased, but dependable. His eyes, gray and still, stared at a small recorder on the table. He pressed play. A distorted voice, half drowned in static, murmured through the speaker. "If I don't make it back, trigger the last command." Jack's jaw tightened. He had heard those words 1,000 times. Each time they returned sharper, heavier. 7 years had passed since the explosion in Iraq, the day he lost his unit, the day he believed he'd pulled the wrong wire. The guilt had lived in his chest ever since, steady as his heartbeat. Outside, thunder rolled through the valley. Duke lifted his head from the corner rug, ears twitching. The 6-year-old German shepherd, black and tan, scar across his shoulder, rose silently, eyes fixed on the window. When the thunder cracked again, he trembled, but didn't move closer. Jack turned toward him. "It's just thunder, buddy," he said quietly. His voice carried the gravel of long nights and unslept years. Duke exhaled, slow and deep, and lay down again. Jack could still see the burn mark on the dog's collar from the same blast that scarred his shoulder. They were both ghosts of the same fire. As the day wore on, the precinct came alive, the distant hum of coffee machines, the shuffle of boots, radios clicking in and out. Jack stood by the window, watching raindrops slide down the glass like the slow passing of time. He had tried to move on, to find meaning in the steady rhythm of patrols and reports, but every siren still echoed like a warning from the desert. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he still smelled smoke. Sometimes he thought he heard the voices of the men he'd left behind. He reached down, resting a hand on Duke's back. The dog stirred, pressed closer. "We made it out," Jack whispered, almost ashamed of the words. Then softer, as if saying it could make it true. "We're still here." Outside, the rain eased. A shaft of light broke through the clouds and touched the desk, glinting on the recorder. Jack turned it off, slid it into the drawer, and closed it gently. He stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet that followed. Deep, forgiving, almost human. Morning light spilled across the wet pavement, sharp and colorless after a long night of rain. The streets of Redwood Creek were quiet, but the silence felt brittle, ready to break. Jack Harrison stood behind the open door of his patrol car, breathing slowly through the cold air that smelled of pine and gun oil. His gloved hands were steady, but his eyes moved constantly, scanning the rundown warehouse ahead. A hostage was inside, a man with a weapon, desperate, cornered. The wind pressed against his Navy windbreaker, tugging at the edges as if trying to pull him back. Beside him, Duke crouched low, muscles taut under the black and tan fur, eyes locked on the door. The dog's breath came in short clouds. Jack could feel the tremor before it started. The rumble of distant thunder rolled across the valley, and something inside Duke snapped. "Easy, boy," Jack whispered, voice low, calm. But the old ghosts were already awake. Duke lunged forward, barking wildly, pulling against the leash until the steel clip gave way. The sound of shouting erupted. A gun fired once. Another officer stumbled back, clutching his arm. Jack caught Duke by the collar, pulling him close, his own voice breaking. "It's me, Duke! It's me!" But the dog's eyes were distant, locked somewhere in the past, somewhere filled with dust, smoke, and screams. Then, just as suddenly, he froze. The warehouse door slammed. The suspect was gone. Sirens wailed. Later that night, the precinct lights burned late. The air smelled of wet uniforms, coffee, and bleach. Jack sat alone in the debriefing room, a thin strip of light cutting across his face. His hands were folded, fingers trembling. Outside the glass, voices murmured, "Captain, medics, the press." He caught fragments. "Loss of control, past trauma. Suspension pending review." Captain Rogers entered, 55, hair silver, uniform immaculate, his voice measured. "Jack," he said quietly, "you're a good man, but this can't happen again." Jack nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Rogers hesitated, then softer. "We'll put Duke under observation. You'll take some time off. Get your head straight." Jack lifted his gaze. The tired gray eyes met the captain's, full of things unsaid. "You want me to walk away from him?" "I'm asking you to rest," Rogers replied. But rest was a word Jack no longer understood. When he stepped outside, night had settled over the town. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining like mirrors. Duke sat in the back of the car, head lowered, the scar on his shoulder catching the pale light. Jack opened the door and crouched beside him. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. "You just remembered." His voice shook. "We both did." Duke pressed his head against Jack's arm, eyes dark and tired. The city around them buzzed faintly. Neon signs, far-off traffic, the hum of life continuing without them. Jack stayed there for a long time, hand on the dog's neck, the warmth grounding him. Somewhere deep inside, beyond guilt and noise, something old began to crack open. An ache, yes, but also a strange, fragile hope. The air smelled of cedar and wet hay. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the small-town clinic, touching the metal cages and wooden counters with a quiet, golden patience. Jack stood near the doorway, hands buried in his jacket pockets. The Navy windbreaker looked heavier than usual, soaked at the shoulders from the early fog. Duke sat beside him, calm but alert, tail low, eyes scanning the unfamiliar room. The scent of medicine, wood polish, and fur filled the space. Behind the counter, Dr. Laura Mitchell moved with quiet precision. She was 38, her light brown hair tied back, a faint tiredness in her eyes that did not dull their gentleness. The white lab coat hung loosely on her small frame. "You must be Jack Harrison," she said softly. Captain Rogers called ahead. Her voice carried a warmth that felt out of place in a world of reports and reprimands. Jack nodded, his answer low and brief. He wasn't good at first meetings anymore. Laura crouched slightly, meeting Duke's gaze. "Hello, soldier," she murmured. Duke's ears flicked, but he didn't move. There was respect in her stillness, the kind animals understood better than words. A sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. A boy appeared, no older than 9, wearing a yellow hoodie with a sketchbook tucked under his arm. Eli Mitchell had his mother's steady eyes and something more, a kind of fragile courage. He hesitated, then knelt a few feet away from the German shepherd. "Hey," he said quietly, "you don't have to be scared." Jack started to intervene, but the boy's tone stopped him. It was calm, certain. "He's not afraid of us. Eli continued, glancing at Jack with a soft smile. "He's afraid of silence." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Duke lowered his head, resting it gently on the floor between his paws. A small sigh left his chest. Laura blinked, her lips parting slightly in surprise. She had seen hundreds of dogs, broken, angry, lost, but this was different. Something passed between the boy and the animal, a kind of recognition that defied all logic. Later, as the morning deepened, Laura prepared the treatment notes while Jack leaned against the window, watching sunlight dance through dust motes. The quiet of the room felt new, no longer the heavy kind, but something lighter, almost forgiving. "You've both been through a lot," she said without looking up. Jack gave a small nod. "He saved my life," he replied. "Now I have to save his." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Laura turned to him, eyes soft but steady. "You can," she said simply. "But not alone." He looked at her, then at the boy sitting on the floor sketching Duke. The dog had stretched out beside him, eyes half closed, tail twitching lazily. For the first time in years, Jack felt something he didn't recognize at first. Peace. It wasn't loud or certain, just a quiet sense that maybe, after all the icy noise, he had finally stepped into a place where healing could begin. Outside, the wind shifted, the clouds broke open, and sunlight spilled across the gravel road. Jack reached down, resting his hand on Duke's back. The fur was warm, alive. "We're not done yet," he whispered. Duke lifted his head, eyes steady. The boy looked up and smiled. Laura, from her desk, watched them silently. 3 souls and a dog, standing at the edge of something new. The first frost came early that year. Morning clung to the windows of the precinct, a thin white breath over the glass. Inside, the hum of the monitors filled the silence. Jack Harrison sat in the dim glow of the security room, watching grainy footage rewind again and again. The screen flickered with the timestamp of the night before, a warehouse robbery, masked men, flashes of muzzle fire. He leaned closer, the light cutting across his tired face. Then he saw it. A figure stepped briefly into view, tall, broad, the movement unmistakable. The camera caught the glint of a wristwatch as the man turned toward the light. Jack's breath caught. That watch. Black leather band, silver rim, military issue, the one he had given Grant Mercer 7 years ago. His pulse slowed. He whispered the name like a memory he didn't want back. Mercer. Captain Rogers entered quietly, his polished shoes echoing off the concrete floor. "You're still here?" he asked, voice firm but low. Jack didn't answer right away. He just pointed to the screen. Rogers frowned, watching the replay. "That's impossible. Mercer died in Iraq. You know that." "I know what I saw," Jack said, his voice steady but dry. "He's alive." Rogers straightened his tie, exhaled through his nose. "Even if he were, it's not your concern anymore. You're still on suspension. Let it go, Jack." Jack's gaze lingered on the frozen image of the man on the screen. "I can't." That night he sat in his truck outside the clinic. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Duke lay in the back seat, his eyes half open, muscles twitching in his sleep. Jack scrolled through old contacts, old files, digging into places no one was supposed to look. It didn't take long before the name appeared. Grant Mercer, listed as consultant, statewide tactical K-9 training program. The same man who'd once told him, "If I don't make it back, trigger the last command." The rain started again, soft but insistent. Jack shut his eyes. "You never died, did you?" he whispered to the dark. The answer came from Duke, a low growl from deep in his chest, the kind that remembered scent, not logic. 2 days later, Redwood Creek hosted a law enforcement summit. Officers and trainers gathered under bright banners and careful smiles. Jack stood in the back, his windbreaker zipped to his chin, eyes scanning the crowd. Then he saw him. Grant Mercer, alive, standing under the stage lights, his posture confident, his voice measured, the same eyes, same half-smile, only colder now. When Mercer's gaze swept across the room, it lingered for a heartbeat too long on Jack. Something unspoken passed between them, recognition, guilt, maybe challenge. Jack's hand tightened unconsciously on Duke's leash. The German shepherd's fur bristled, his ears pinned back. And when Mercer took a step closer, Duke bared his teeth and growled, a deep warning sound that silenced the hall. For big Jack, the noise felt like an echo from a desert long buried. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just looked at the man who had once been his brother in arms, now standing like a ghost wearing a stranger's face. Somewhere inside, he knew. The past hadn't stayed dead. It had only been waiting. The morning sun was pale and cold, the kind that never truly warmed the ground. Smoke still clung to the edges of the parking lot, like a ghost unwilling to leave. Jack stood near the wreck of his truck, the twisted metal still hissing in the cool air. His hands were blackened with soot, his jacket smelled of gasoline. Duke sat beside him, chest rising fast, fur singed at the edges. He had pulled Jack from the vehicle seconds before it went up. The explosion had blown out windows across the precinct, and now the air was thick with the sound of sirens, the rush of boots, the murmur of disbelief. Jack didn't speak. He only looked at the fire and saw something older than flames, the same red glare that had haunted his dreams since Iraq. Captain Rogers arrived moments later, his uniform half soaked from the fire hoses. "You're lucky to be alive," he said quietly, though there was a tension under his calm. "Preliminary says gas leak." Jack shook his head. "It wasn't gas." His voice was low, hoarse. "Someone planted it." Rogers looked at him for a long moment. "Jack, maybe it's time to take some real time off. You've been under a lot of pressure." He hesitated before adding, "Some people think you're seeing ghosts." Jack met his eyes. "Maybe I am," he said, "but one of them just tried to kill me." That night his apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the radio and the soft sound of Duke pacing the floor. Jack's hand trembled slightly as he set the old recorder on the table, the same one that had carried Mercer's voice. He pressed play. The familiar words crackled through static. "If I don't make it back, trigger the last command." Then the recording broke, a jagged skip, a gap of silence. Jack rewound, played it again, the same cut. He turned up the volume, leaning in. Beneath the hiss of static, a second voice surfaced, faint but unmistakable. "And clear the site." He froze, the missing fragment, not a malfunction, an edit. A deliberate hand had erased Mercer's final words. Duke lifted his head, ears twitching. The dog's gaze found Jack's, searching as if sensing the tremor in his heartbeat. "It wasn't me," Jack whispered, barely able to breathe. "It was him. It was always him." His knees gave out, and he sank onto the floor, the weight of 7 years collapsing all at once. Duke pressed close, silent, steady. The dog's warmth grounded him in the darkness. Outside, wind pushed against the old windows, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. Jack sat there for a long time, head bowed, his fingers still clutching the recorder. Somewhere in the hum of the night, a quiet understanding settled in. He hadn't been the man who destroyed his team. He had been the one left alive to uncover the truth. Rain had returned to Redwood Creek, soft and unhurried, washing the dust from the old farmhouse roof. The fields smelled of pine and wet soil. Somewhere inside, a kettle whistled faintly. Jack stood by the window, his reflection faint against the glass. The Navy windbreaker hung loosely on his shoulders now, no longer the armor it used to be. He watched Duke outside, pacing near the fence line, every rumble of thunder making the dog flinch and lower his head. The scars along Duke's shoulder gleamed faintly under the gray light. Jack whispered, "Easy, boy," though he knew the words weren't enough. Some wounds didn't listen to reason. They waited for time, or kindness, or both. From behind him came Laura's voice, quiet and steady. "You both need rest, Jack." She stood in the kitchen doorway, her hair loosely tied, sleeves rolled up from tending to the horses. Her calm had a way of settling the air around her. "He'll heal," she said. Jack gave a small nod but didn't turn. "If he can," he murmured. "He's got ghosts too." That evening, Eli crept out to the porch. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. He found Duke lying near the steps, eyes half open, body tense with the weight of memory. Eli sat beside him without a word, pulling his hoodie tighter against the chill. For a long while, they just listened. The rain, the wind, the occasional groan of the old house. Then Eli spoke softly, like sharing a secret. "You don't have to fight anymore," he said. "You just have to protect." Duke's ears flicked. The boy's small hand brushed against his fur, hesitant at first, then sure. The German shepherd let out a low sigh, his body relaxing inch by inch. Then, almost uncertainly, his tail moved, one slow wag, then another. From the window, Jack saw it and felt something tighten in his chest. The smallest motion, and yet it broke through months of silence and fear. Later that night, the world outside was still. Jack sat at Laura's old wooden table, maps and photos spread before him. A faint lamp glow traced the lines of exhaustion on his face. He had hacked into a restricted police feed, and there it was, Mercer's signature. Shipment manifests, bridge routes, coordinates marked Redwood Bridge, 2300 hours. His pulse steadied as he traced the path with a finger. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stopping something bigger than both of them. Laura stepped in quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You're going back, aren't you?" she asked. Jack didn't lie. "Yeah." She set the cup beside him, her eyes unreadable. "You'll lose your job." He looked up at her, voice low but certain. "Then I'll lose it doing the right thing." He walked out to the porch where Duke waited, alert now, head high despite the distant thunder. Jack knelt, hand resting against the warm fur. "One more time, partner," he whispered. "We finish this. For them and for us." Duke's amber eyes met his, steady and alive. The storm cracked faintly in the distance, but this time the dog didn't flinch. The storm came without mercy. Wind howled through the valley, bending trees until they creaked like old bones. The bridge over Redwood Creek shimmered under the relentless rain, its steel frame trembling with every gust. Jack stood at the edge of the woods, soaked to the skin, his windbreaker plastered against his body. The radio on his shoulder crackled uselessly. Too much interference. He could see the convoy ahead, 3 black trucks crawling across the bridge like shadows. In the lead vehicle stood Mercer, face half hidden under the hood of his tactical jacket. His voice carried through the rain, distorted by the storm, but still sharp enough to cut through the air. "You have something that belongs to me, Jack," he called. "And I have something that belongs to you." Jack's stomach turned when he saw a small figure near Mercer. Eli. The boy's hands were bound, his hoodie clinging to him, eyes wide with fear. Laura's scream still echoed in Jack's head from the phone call moments earlier. Jack stepped forward slowly, palms raised. "Let the kid go, Mercer. You want the drive? Take it." His voice cracked but held steady. Mercer's grin flashed cold under the lightning. "You don't get to give orders anymore, Jack. You just get to watch." He lifted a small remote in his hand. "Do you remember this?" he asked softly, then spoke the words that once haunted Jack's every dream. The last command. The sound of those 3 words tore through the storm. Duke stiffened beside Jack. The German shepherd's fur bristled, ears pinned, eyes fixed on Mercer. A deep growl rose from his chest, low and feral. The command was one Mercer had used in combat, a trigger word for K9 attack. Jack barely had time to shout before Duke lunged. The dog's powerful form cut through the rain, teeth finding Mercer's arm. The remote fell, clattering against the metal bridge. Mercer screamed, trying to shake him off, but Duke held on, snarling, every muscle burning with remembered fury. A flash of lightning lit the scene. Mercer stumbled backward, losing his footing on the slick bridge. The remote slipped from his other hand and tumbled toward the water below. Jack ran forward, grabbing Duke by the collar just as Mercer fell over the railing. The man's body vanished into the dark flood with a hollow splash. A heartbeat later, the weakened bridge groaned, the current tearing at its foundation. The dog lost balance, slipping toward the edge. Jack dove without thinking, his fingers brushing wet fur before the river swallowed them both. The water was ice and thunder. Jack fought to surface, arm wrapped around Duke, his lungs burning, his vision blurring from the cold. Above them, red and blue lights flashed through the storm as police sirens wailed from the ridge. Strong hands reached down from the rescue line, pulling them to safety. Jack collapsed on the riverbank, coughing, soaked, trembling. Duke lay beside him, panting, hard but alive. The bridge behind them crumbled, taking Mercer and his madness with it. When Laura and Eli reached him, Jack didn't speak. He just placed a hand on Duke's head and whispered, "It's over, partner." The storm began to fade, the rain softening to a mist. Somewhere beyond the clouds, dawn waited. Morning sunlight drifted through the tall windows of the precinct, soft and golden, carrying the scent of polished wood and rain that had just ended. The building felt quieter than usual, not heavy, but peaceful, as if it too was ready to remember. Jack Harrison stood before the empty space on the Wall of Honor, a framed photograph in his hands. The picture was worn at the edges, its colors faded. 7 men and 1 dog, all smiling in the desert sun, years before the noise and fire. His reflection merged with theirs on the glass. He wore his uniform again, crisp and dark, but his eyes carried something gentler now. Captain Rogers, standing nearby, spoke softly. "You don't have to say anything, Jack. The picture says enough." Jack nodded once, his voice low but steady. "No, they deserve words." He turned to the gathered officers, some young and wide-eyed, some older, with lines carved deep from duty and loss. "This," he said, raising the frame slightly, "is the reason I'm still here. The last command, it wasn't to destroy, it was to protect." His tone wasn't grand. It was humble, quiet, the way truth often is. He hung the photo on the wall next to medals and names, then stepped back. The room fell into silence, not out of protocol, but reverence. Duke sat at his side, fur brushed and gleaming under the light, a faint scar still visible along his shoulder. The silver K9 badge rested against his collar, glinting like a medal that belonged to both man and beast. After the ceremony, they moved outside. The courtyard was bright, children laughing near a small banner that read, K9 Hope Program. Duke lay beside Eli, head resting on the boy's knee, as Laura spoke with other officers about the new therapy initiative, using retired K9s to help families heal. The world had softened in its edges. Jack watched the 2 of them from a distance, the way someone watches sunlight move across old scars. For a long moment he said nothing, just let the sound of laughter replace the echoes of gunfire that had haunted his nights. When Eli called out, "Come sit with us, Officer Jack," he smiled, a real smile this time, and joined them. Duke's ears perked, tail sweeping the ground gently. The air was warm, alive, Jack reached down to rub the dog's neck. "You did good, partner," he whispered. Duke's eyes closed, the kind of peace that only comes when duty has turned into love. Somewhere behind them, the wall of honor gleamed faintly in the sun, and for the first time in years, it felt like the ghosts had finally gone home. In the quiet moments after the story ends, remember this: even the strongest hearts grow tired, and even the bravest souls can feel alone. Many of us carry silent battles, aging bodies, fading strength, long nights of pain or loneliness. But your story isn't over. You matter. Your presence, your memories, your faith still light the world. If this tale touched you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment, subscribe, and may God bless you with comfort, healing, and peace. You are never walking this road alone.